Welcome to the Spring 2018 Chevy Chase Historical Society Lecture and Annual Meeting. My name is Angela Lancaster, and I'm honored to be president of the Chevy Chase Historical Society. We will have a brief business meeting prior to our speaker today, but it won't be long. We've got election of officers coming up and directors. Some of you may not know we have big news at the Historical Society. We have moved our archive and research center from the lower level of the Chevy Chase Library to new space at 8401 Connecticut Avenue. We're in Suite 1010. That's up at historic Chevy Chase Lake. And we'd love for you to come visit us. We have open hours on Tuesday, 10 to 12, 1 to 3, and other times by appointment. So come by and see the new space, see the new archive room, see the reading room. It's a lot of fun. We're very, very pleased with this move of ours. There were many, many people who were involved in this move, and we thank all of them for their time, talent, and treasure. Many of them are right here in this room, so thank you all who helped out on that. We have an annual report for 2017, which is at the back of the room. If you'd like a copy of it, please help yourself. Okay, a few announcements. 2018 membership, we're still working on membership, so if you haven't signed up, do so. The membership forms also at the back table. On April 14th, there's a wonderful history go-around that we're going to be having at Chevy Chase Lake about the history of Chevy Chase Lake. Gail Sansbury, a former director, is going to be giving that, there you are, Gail, giving that history go-around, and I urge everybody who hasn't signed up for it, please do. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's a Saturday, 1 o'clock, right, Mary? And a couple of hours, great fun learning about what happened at, when that area back there really had a lake instead of office buildings. There's an evaluation sheet on your seat. We ask that you please fill it out. I'm going to ask you to fill it out during the Q&A, if that's okay with Clare. And we will collect them all and have a drawing. And we have a prize, which is a Wizard of Chevy Chase and Steve Roberts' book about Bethesda and Chevy Chase. So please fill out your evaluation sheets. Claire Kelly will also be selling the books that she's going to be talking about after the meeting and after the Q&A. And please, everybody, make sure you have some refreshments. If you haven't already, we've got lots that we hope you all enjoy. So for a quick business meeting now, I'm going to first call on Julie Canestra, who is chair of our nominating committee, to present the slate.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, and thank you, Angela. As Angela mentioned, we have to do a little bit of business before our meeting today. I would like to present the slate of officers and our Class C directors. They are 3-year terms that will begin on July 1st, and I would just ask that when I mention your name, if you could please stand. Our slate of officers: Mary Sheehan, President. Where's Mary? Right in front of you. Susan Bollendorf, Vice President. She's in the back over there. Natasha Safey, Recording Secretary. And Kirsten Williams, Treasurer, who I am not sure was able to make it. And our Class C directors: Catherine Cesari, he's back there. John Higgins. Where's John? He's back there. He's got him too? Okay. Myself, Julie Canestra, and Angela Lancaster. Thank you. Angela?
Okay, you've heard the slate of officers and candidates for Class C directors to be elected for 3-year terms. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Okay, good. The slate's passed. Thank you so much. And now I will call on Mary Sheehan, our program chair, to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
So hello, everyone. Thank you again for coming today. Our speaker, Clare Lise Kelly, is an architectural historian and educator who has been researching and writing about the architecture and settlement patterns of Montgomery County for nearly 3 decades. From 1990 to 2017, she managed the research and historic designation projects for the Montgomery County Planning Board of the Montgomery National Capital Park and Planning Commission. And there she was instrumental in the protection of scores of historic resources through historic designation, both locally and on the National Register. In 2013, she established the Planning Board's Montgomery Modern Initiative to raise awareness of the value of mid-century modern architecture in our county. Her work on this project is reflected in her 2015 book, Montgomery Modern, which, as Angela mentioned, will be for sale after the lecture, and Claire would be happy to sign any books that you purchase today. Reviewers describe this book as a pioneering book of its kind and as the seminal historical accounting and perspective of how the international modern movement influenced architecture in Montgomery County. So she will share some of that history and some of that perspective with us today. Claire has a bachelor's degree in design and environmental science from Cornell University and a master's degree in historic preservation from the University of Vermont. She's a frequent public lecturer on modern architecture, most recently at the University of Maryland, the Jewish Historical Society of Greater Washington, the Society of Architectural Historians, and George Washington University. She has received a variety of awards for her work, including the American Institute of Architects Paul Key Medal for Architectural Advocacy, and the Montgomery Preservation's Montgomery Prize for 25 years of research and education on the county's architectural history. In addition, Claire is a founding board member of the DC chapter of Doko Moko, which is an international organization dedicated to the documentation and conservation of buildings, sites, and neighborhoods of the modern movement. So please join me in welcoming Clare Lise Kelly.
Great. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I've had the good fortune of working with the Chevy Chase Historical Society over the years, and it's been a testament to the history of Chevy Chase that it's been woven through my study of architectural history here in the county. For the better part of a decade, in the 1990s, I was involved with the research and field survey work here in Chevy Chase, and it was great to see the publication of this reference work by Joey Lampel and Kim Williams. And the book draws in part from our survey work that began here in the early 90s. Chevy Chase and the Historic District feature prominently in my last book, Places from the Past, about the county's architectural heritage, which includes an inventory of designated historic resources. So today I'm speaking about the book Montgomery Modern, and I'll focus on projects in Chevy Chase. Montgomery Modern considers the groundbreaking design of modern architecture in our county. After more than half a century, modern architecture has come of age. We've now come to the point where modern is historic. The book includes some of the best and award-winning examples of projects recognized in their day for outstanding design or innovative planning. And we're honored to have in the book images of then and now by two accomplished photographers. Carol Highsmith worked for us on commission to record the current views. Her work resides at the Library of Congress. The late Robert Lautman was photographer to the top architects back in the day, and his period photographs are at the National Building Museum. And here you see an example of then and now the Eden House on Crail Drive in Bethesda. For most of our nation's history, architectural design was revivalist. We were looking backward to Greek and Roman classical antiquity, to medieval European half-timbering, and to colonial American roots. Examples here are two residences of the Corby brothers at Strathmore Hall and on Chevy Chase Circle. These are designs steeped in tradition and dripping with applied molding. Conventional views are depicted in this promotional booklet from the 1930s. The child is sheltered by the parent, hearkening to traditional values of conformity and subordination. Revivalist house design is rooted in the past with small pane windows and shutters and a steep roof line. Public and private buildings were built of brick and wood and stone, anchored in the Anglo-American tradition. Here you see Bethesda Chevy Chase High School. It was the largest school building when it opened in 1935, and it represents the authoritarian approach to education. Architect Howard Cutler looked to Georgian Revival buildings of Harvard and William and Mary for his design. Fast forward 30 years, and we have a new world view and a radical change in design. Buildings are steel and concrete and glass, with inventive shapes and open floor plans. This architect's rendering at the left represents progressive values. A child is freely exploring the environment. There's a spirit of independence and individualism. This philosophy is expressed in the creative design of the Green Acres School, seen at the top, with glass wall classrooms and patios that open to nature. It's a child-directed education. Within a short time, there was a drastic change in the built environment and the world view. And you see the residents in the lower right, also glass and steel. It's the Harold Eston, it's the Goldblum House on Krell Drive. Modern architecture was a sharp break with the past. For the first time in our history, we were looking forward in design, and we sought new inspiration. It's not rooted in European tradition, not medieval and not classical, but inspired by two main sources, American industry and the natural environment. I've identified some key elements that fostered mid-century modern design in Montgomery County: our rugged landscape, our location next to the nation's capital, a progressive citizenry, and a futuristic spirit. Modern architecture didn't suddenly appear after World War II. I mentioned a major inspiration was American industry and new technology. The factories of Albert Kahn were a great inspiration for the early modernists. They're reinforced concrete structures with glass sheathing that brought open floor plans and natural light. And this example is a 1910 Ford factory in Detroit. Also, grain elevators were admired for their beauty with strong volumes and functional form. European modernists published photos of American grain elevators. They were widely circulated, including this Baltimore example. Another major force was the reverence for nature found in the work of American architect Frank Lloyd Wright. His buildings were designed in harmony with a natural setting. Here's his Roby House in Chicago, constructed in 1910. Wright's aesthetic for custom houses in the early 1900s became hallmarks of modern ranch houses in the post-war era. Low-slung, horizontal massing, terraces and balconies, built-in planters, and bands of windows. His works were published in 1910 in the Wasmuth Portfolio, a book that introduced Wright's innovative design to the world. Wright had a great influence on European modernists. Peter Behrens was a founder of the German Werkbund, a progressive partnership of architects, artists, and industrialists. Working in his studio were three apprentices, Walter Gropius, Le Corbusier, and Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. At the studio door in 1910 arrived Frank Lloyd Wright's Wasmuth Portfolio. Gropius recalls that the trio was so astounded by Wright's projects that work stopped for the day. These individuals, two Germans and a Swiss, were influenced by Wright and American history, and together with Wright, they were pioneers of modernism. Walter Gropius founded the Bauhaus School of Design and spearheaded modernism in the U.S. He fled Nazi Germany in 1937. He became chair of Harvard's architecture department. Le Corbusier was an early proponent of concrete slab buildings. He was influential in his design with columns that he called pilotis. Mies was the last director of the Bauhaus School, and he became head of architecture at Illinois Institute of Technology. He's best known for his steel frame and curtain wall design. The futuristic spirit of modern design found its way to Montgomery County in the New Deal era, a time of progressive government and population boom. The WTOP transmitter building was a vision of modernism built in the farmland of Wheaton. The sculptural quality of the CBS radio station is clearly inspired by European modernism, built just a few years after Le Corbusier's Villa Savoye. WTOP is a designated historic site. The interest in modern architecture was stoked by the New York World's Fair. The fair opened in 1939, but anticipation built well in advance, with news articles starting in 1937. The town of tomorrow displayed model houses featuring the latest in innovations. Enterprising developers met the enthusiasm by building several World's Fair model houses here in the county. On Massachusetts Avenue, the local NBC station built this House of the Future. This was cutting-edge European modernism, an asymmetrical design with stark white walls, cubicle forms, flat roofs, and sun decks. Yet architects in the 1930s in this age were finding the need to temper modernism to suit conservative tastes. An early example is the Miron Mesrobian House in Section 4, designed by the architect for his own family. I included this book in my work in the inventory, and since the book was published, this resource has been listed on the National Register. The nomination and detailed research are by Caroline Mesrobian Hickman, who's a granddaughter of the architect. Miron Mesrobian was a well-regarded local architect. He was an Armenian American, a native of Turkey who worked in the office of the palace architect in Istanbul in the final years of the Ottoman Empire. Faced with upheaval in his homeland, he immigrated here with his wife and young sons in 1921. Mesrobian became chief architect for Harry Wardman, the preeminent real estate developer in Washington. He designed a wide range of projects, including these landmark hotels, the Hay Adams of 1927 and the Carlton, now the St. Regis, 1926. Early design schemes for his house show Mesrobian's interest in European modernism. According to his sons, the architect sought financing from the Chevy Chase Land Company, which refused to provide it. They found the design too radical compared with the existing traditional houses of Chevy Chase. From the outset, the land company used covenants to control the physical nature of their development. As you know, covenants required architectural review by the Chevy Chase Land Company, including the siting, design, and color scheme of buildings. The deed for the Mesrobian house lot required a minimum cost of $7,500. The house would end up costing over $15,000. And it's important to take a moment to address the issue of deed covenants in the 1930s. Vast tracts of land were opening for development. This map shows new subdivisions built by this time. Yet these communities were not open to everyone. In the 20th century, developers in Chevy Chase, Bethesda, and Silver Spring began to use deed restrictions with racist and anti-Semitic covenants. This was sadly a common practice and was codified in the 30s by the federal government. The underwriting manual for the federal mortgages had guidelines calling for segregated subdivisions. In 1948, the Supreme Court ruled such deed covenants were unconstitutional, yet the Federal Housing Administration continued to endorse segregated suburbs until the Fair Housing Act of 1968. So it's important to remember this context as we look at how the community came to be. In her research, Caroline asks, why did the Mesrobians choose Chevy Chase for their home? Miron and his wife Zabel considered other house sites in the region. The Chevy Chase location was preferred in large part because of its access to public transit. The streetcar had shut down in 1935, but there was a bus line on Connecticut Avenue. Miron frequently walked or took the bus to shops in Chevy Chase, D.C. They would live in the house until 1975, and neither Zabel nor Miron ever learned to drive a car. Mesrobian modified the design of his residence to conform to the land company's conservative taste. Yet the house has a distinctive modernist character. There's an asymmetrical facade, large glass windows, glass block entrance, incised geometrics, and a rooftop sun deck. Mesrobian had visited the New York World's Fair and was inspired by the House of Glass. His influence is seen here. These two photos on the left and on the bottom are from the House of Glass in the World's Fair, and they include features that he included in his own house, with glass block illuminating the master bathroom and the sun porch opening from the master bedroom. His Chevy Chase house is the only residence that Ms. Robian designed for his personal use, and it remains in the family today. After World War II, Montgomery County had the highest per capita income and was the 4th fastest growing county in the nation. Our population increased dramatically with a striking new architect to reflect this new era. Curtain wall design office buildings transformed downtown Bethesda and Silver Spring. Geico is a landmark example in Friendship Heights. The curtain walls are composed of porcelain enamel and textured glass panels that were manufactured in Germany. The skeleton frame design enables an open floor plan. Walls are not load-bearing, and the panels are hung on a curtain, like a curtain on a frame, and that's why they're often called curtain wall buildings. Geico was designed by Vincent Kling. At the time, he was also engaged in creating Penn Center Master Plan in Philadelphia. Geico is a significant early building type, a corporate suburban headquarters, carefully framed in a natural setting. Geico is now a threatened resource. A development plan would call for demolition of this facility. Its future is uncertain. A landmark building that has been protected for future generations is the Seymour Krieger house, designed by Marcel Breuer. Breuer was a Bauhaus master who emigrated from Germany with Walter Gropius, joined Harvard's faculty, and was an influential designer of buildings and furniture. The steel frame structure is sheathed in glass, yet grounded with native fieldstone base. The owners nominated their own house for historic designation, and it's on both the National Register and it's also designated locally on the Master Plan for Historic Preservation. And they were able to benefit from tax credits for its renovation because of its designation. Nearby, Frank Lloyd Wright designed a house for his youngest son, who was an attorney for the Department of Justice. Wright brought an organic nature to modern design. As I mentioned, his houses were designed to integrate with a natural landscape. Here, he was inspired by the steeply sloping site along Cabin John Creek. The public facade, which you see in the upper left, is designed for privacy. It's solid masonry, small windows, and it's anchored by a vertical tower which combines fire and water. It has the chimney and also the plumbing stack. The downhill side, seen on the bottom view, faces the forested stream valley with a ribbon of windows, wood siding, and tiered balcony terraces. Wright was influential in bringing the concept of indoor-outdoor living in American culture. Nature is brought into the interior living space through banks of windows. The living space is brought out into nature through terraces and balconies. The house represents the latest phase of his work. It's a hemicyclical plan. This football shape is a motif carried out in the furnishings, and you can see that in the coffee table and the stools in the upper left. And that view is by Robert Lautman soon after the house had been built, and the view is quite similar today. The house remains in the family and is now under the care of Tom Wright, who's the grandson of Frank Lloyd Wright and the son of Robert Llewellyn Wright, who had the house built. Tom was in college when the house was finally finished, so he didn't get to live there as a child, but he very much enjoys living there now. We've looked at landmark custom houses by master architects. Charles Goodman was a local architect with a mission to bring affordable, modern houses to the middle class. His earliest and largest project of tract houses was Holland Hills in Fairfax County. Here in Montgomery County, he designed several projects, starting with Hammond Hill in 1950. These are skeleton frame structures with curtain walls. In this case, glass and wood panels hang on a timber frame. Hammond Wood nearby is on the forested tract near Rock Creek Park. Goodman worked with developers to preserve the natural setting, and he carefully situated the houses to maximize views to nature. This 3-bedroom house is 1,100 square feet. It's one of 5 house types he provided. And the smaller sizes helped to make the houses affordable for young families. It has an open floor plan, and the chimney serves as a visual anchor for the design. Hammond Wood is one of 3 Goodman subdivisions in Montgomery County that have been listed in the National Register of Historic Places. Goodman also designed custom houses. Several are found in the Rolling Wood area. On Greenvale Road are a pair of neighboring houses. This one was designed for Goodman's personal attorney, Louis Jacobs, from 1952. On the street level, the house is 1 story, and it opens to 2 stories on the back, overlooking Rock Creek Park. In the lower level, glass walls give the effect of living in a glass box. Goodman's office was a proving ground for the next generation of modernist architects. David Condon was Goodman's lead art designer for Holland Hills and Hammond Wood. His later firm, Keyes, Lethbridge, and Condon, became a leading firm with many landmark projects in the 1960s. Here you see a current view of the center part of the administration building from 1962, and a historic view by Robert Lautman. A key factor that fostered modernism in Montgomery County was the federal government. Federal agencies and contractors brought a new population to the county who built modern houses. And also, federal agencies hired accomplished local architects to design modern facilities. Keyes, Lethbridge, Condon also designed Cedar Lane Unitarian Church. Consulting architect Pietro Beluschi was dean of MIT School of Architecture and Planning at the time. Modern churches and synagogues served as community centers to serve new suburban population. Cedar Lane Unitarian Church has an organic design using rustic materials, wood and stone and earth-toned glass, and it's banked into the sloping site along Rock Creek. In section 3, we have another excellent example of architect-designed house for personal use, David Condon's own house on Georgia Street. This project was recognized for a design that is contemporary yet sensitive to an existing neighborhood. The Condon house has a rather formal and reserved front facade with a shed roof that rises to 2 stories on the back facade and a sheltered enclosed garden court. Condon was named Fellow of the AIA in 1967, 1 year after the house was built. When he died in 1996, he was recognized as a leading architect who helped to introduce modern design to the DC area. 2 years later, Hartman Cox designed a great example of site-specific modern design that's compatible with its neighbors. The Phillips Brewer House has a prominent site on Connecticut Avenue at East-West Highway. The house is oriented away from busy roads with a steep, sloping roof facing traffic. The color, scale, and angular design were inspired by neighboring houses. The tree helped to influence the design of the house. Courtyards provide privacy on the tight lot. You can see that in the site plan. The main facade faces the alley cul-de-sac, and the roof line steps down to meet the neighboring houses. This project received an AIA National Honor Award in 1970. The house was featured in the AIA Guide to the Architecture of Washington, D.C. in 1974, and it was called a case study of how a small corner lot bypassed by developers and considered unbuildable may, in skilled hands, be turned into an opportunity to achieve architectural distinction. Modern interiors called for modern furnishings. Here we see Le Corbusier's chaise longue, designed in 1928 in this historic view of Phillips Brewer House, and also on the right, Marcel Breuer's tubular furniture. Starting as early as 1949, local shops opened, including Modern Designs Incorporated and Glass House. They provided contemporary furnishings. I've shown you examples of buildings that have been well preserved with homeowners that have been great stewards of their architectural heritage. Sadly, we have lost many notable examples, and I've included them in the book as well. Some that were already demolished by the time the book was written, some that were slated for demolition, and others that we have lost since then, and that's in 2 years. Arthur Keyes built his house in Potomac in 1960. His cantilever design rose out of the hillside above the Potomac River, and it was also included in the AIA Guide to Architecture in '74. The house was sold out of the family soon after this photo was taken in 2000, and it's been demolished. Buildings of the recent past are often considered obsolete or outdated rather than being appreciated as a product of their time. In recent years, we've begun to see a new appreciation for modern design, and this is certainly seen in home furnishing stores. On the bottom image, you see a period view of modern furnishings for sale, and the view in the upper slide is a current furnishing being sold, and can show you the idea of the popularity of furniture and furnishings from this time period. We also see this in new construction. Ms. Robian was forbidden from fully realizing his European modernist residence on Connecticut Avenue. Now we have a European modernist revival house on Connecticut Avenue in Section 3. We're also seeing modern design emerging as revivalist houses are given makeovers, and they're adapted to have a modern aesthetic. And we're seeing houses such as this being constructed in Bethesda and Chevy Chase and Silver Spring. We also have great examples of how mid-century modern design can be adapted to changing needs. The River Road Unitarian Church has a new addition that's compatible with the original modern building designed by Keyes, Lethbridge, and Condon in 1964. Mid-century modernism has come of age. Buildings that are 50 years old are old enough for us to have perspective, to understand the impact of the period of modern architecture and its value as part of our cultural heritage. A half century is a guideline for assessing significance, and the rule of thumb for listing something on the National Register is that it should be at least 50 years old. Carter-Rock Springs neighborhoods nominated their own community for National Register listing. It's now a National Register Historic District, and the clubhouse has also been well preserved with continued use. And I want to leave you with a happy example of a building that had been threatened by change. We were close to, there was a threat to North Chevy Chase Pool House. Neighbors realized its value and rallied to have the building restored. We included it in a bike tour that we had held a few years ago, which had a number of architects. It was sponsored by the AIA Potomac Valley, who were quite impressed by the design of the pool house. It's a modest example of mid-century, everyday mid-century modern design. It's my hope that the book will help to raise awareness and appreciation of this time period and this type of architecture, and that we can make wise choices to care for our mid-century modern architectural heritage. Thank you.
We have time for a few questions.
Okay.
Do you want to just field them?
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions.
And if you don't mind, if you would please fill out your evaluation forms. We're going to collect them in the back while she's answering questions.
Yes.
I wonder where you feel Sarn and Dulles Airport fits in.
Yeah, well, the question is about Sarnen's Dulles Airport, and that's a great example of modern architecture. And he was designing an airport terminal that represents this new age of flight. And it's a beautiful design with a swooping roof that really pays wonderful homage to airplane flight, and is also a very innovative design. We had a great example that had a similar type of influence in the Wheaton Rec Center, which was the Wheaton Youth Center. It had a swooping roof, and it was a thin shelled concrete roof that was opened 2 years after a Dulles terminal. And sadly, that was demolished recently. So I'd like to say it's great that the Dulles Terminal is still in wonderful use, and it's a great mid-century modern building. Yes?
What are some of the ways an architect can make a mid-century modern house compatible with the more traditional Chevy Chase vernacular?
Well, I guess there's two things. One is about, are you talking about completely new construction on an empty lot? So if it's a lot that had never been built on, I think those two examples that I gave are really wonderful examples of how it's possible to step a design down so that it meets the level of neighboring houses, and also pays respect to, for example, the roof shape of other houses, where a lot of modern houses have very flat roofs. And so both the Phillips Brewer house and the David Condon house have rather steep roofs, and so they help to fit in the modern aesthetic with the traditional buildings. But it is definitely a challenge. It's another great example of how modern and historic can meld in the Jacobson addition in Chevy Chase Village, where it's a glass connector between the historic building and the new addition, and so that helps to make a break between you, and you can see very clearly how a building evolved with the original building and the new addition. Yes?
A lot of these were modern from the 50s and the 60s. Where is modern architecture now? What's an example of a modern architect in 2017 or 2018? Or do they look the same as they used to?
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question. We're going through a time period now in a lot of ways, especially with public buildings, but also with residential buildings. We're going into a revival of modernism. So it's something that we see throughout our history of architecture, where we have an original time period like the original Greek buildings, and then they're being built anew with a new look, and they're Greek revival buildings. And so now we have this time period after 50 years, we have a revival of modern buildings. And if you look at downtown Silver Spring, many of the buildings, including those that have gotten design awards, are modern revival buildings in a way. The Silver Spring Civic building, and also the library, that they have angular design in the case of the library, which is similar in some ways to the Eden House and the architect's house for Cohen Haft's designed house. And so in the case of the Silver Spring Civic Center, you can see a revival of that kind of Bauhaus European modern aesthetic. The revivalist buildings continue to be popular as well, and their popularity really hasn't diminished since the earlier times as well. Yes?
Ken Freeman's work in Bradley Park, a lot of those seem to have now left us. Can you speak a bit about that development in particular?
I'm sorry, the question was about Bradley Park.
Bradley Park development that Ken Freeman financed. So much of those homes seem to already be aging.
Okay, so the question was about Ken Freeman's houses in Bradley Park, and I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with those houses. I surveyed much of the county and included a lot in my book, but there's still obviously a lot to be known about it. I'd be happy to talk with you about that later on. Yes? Question?
Two observations. One, I lived in Hammond Woods. The first house we had was just like one of those houses you showed with a basement. But that little development was very well hidden because of landscaping. It was amongst all sorts of little ramblers, little brick ramblers, and suddenly you had all these trees, and nestled among the trees were these contemporary houses. But second, you go to places in Chicago, such as Winnetka or Wilmette, you see all kinds of houses of different, architectural interest side by side. It doesn't bother you, it just makes it more interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yep, those are great observations. And it was a testament to Charles Goodman and to the developers that he worked with, that one of the things that happened right after World War II, there was so much pressure for building houses, and developers were just scraping the land. If you look at developments along Veers Mill Road, they were just leveling the trees, and in Hammond Woods, they chose to keep the trees and keep the natural landscape. And so when you're there, you realize you're in a different place. And that's one of the things that sort of helps to define a historic district. When you're there, you know you're somewhere else, and it's a very special place. Yes?
It's the Geico site. If I remember, don't the sector, didn't the county approve their sector plan? And so what I'm understanding from you is that the historic nature of historic nature of the building is what is preventing that Geico site from becoming what Chevy,
No, there's nothing that's preventing the Geico property from being redeveloped. So Geico went to the planning board and asked to have this plan approved for redevelopment. It's been approved, but I don't know that they're actively moving forward with their plan. There's nothing to prevent them from actively moving forward with the plan. Right now it's on the books, and it's valid for some years to come. But it's not protected in any way by historic preservation. I merely included it in my inventory, and I'm, raising the issue about the value of the property, but it doesn't have any protection currently. Yes?
Just a brief observation. I go to Cedar Lane Unitarian Church, and they're basically, and I have mixed feelings about it, but the church has undertaken a capital campaign for improving the building. But I think what's going to come out of it is some renovation that doesn't really change the basic design, possibly lengthening the building, certainly making it more handicap accessible, which is necessary, and putting in sprinkler systems and things like that. But there's going to be a little bit of a change, I think.
Well, it's great to hear, and we included Cedar Lane Unitarian Church in our Montgomery Modern tour 2 years ago, and we're very impressed with the folks of the congregation who were so respectful of the building's architecture, and that we understood a great trouble was taken to restore the glass sphere lights inside the church, and it's wonderful to see that there's respect for the architecture there. Yes?
Two questions. One of your first pictures, not the Frank Lloyd Wright house, shows, I think it's a wooden house that has a structure off to the left that looks like a bridge to nowhere. What is that?
Yeah, that's a balcony. It's a pointed, I guess I have to, it's a pointed roof, it's a pointed balcony. And so that is a kind of an extreme example. You get another little survey of my talk in reverse. It's a great example of extending living space out into nature, that the architects designed this structure that's so that's a deck, a balcony deck.
But it's on a slope. It's sloping?
It does have that appearance in this view. I can't verify that, but it does look that way. It might be the perspective, I couldn't say.
Okay, well, my other question is, when you were talking about the Nestrovian house, you said something about the Chevy Chase Land Company could influence the landscaping. He asked for something about the landscaping. Did I hear that right?
No, I didn't say anything about the landscaping.
Oh, so it was the design of the house.
The design of the house, that was too modern. Yeah. And so Ms. Robian came back with a house that was more tempered in its modernism. And the fence around the property was built a few years later, and it's brick, and that was intended to help soften the transition between the traditional neighboring houses and the modern house. Yes?
This is a comment on April 28th, the Holland Hills neighborhood is sponsoring a tour. So I thought people who were here, so your talk might be to learn about that tour.
Great. the comment for those who didn't hear is about the Holland Hills annual tour is coming up in April, so be sure to take a look at that. And it's a wonderful tour. I've been on it, and you can visit a whole variety of houses, and they have docents in each house, and so it's really a great way to experience these houses firsthand. Yes?
So you mentioned a few factors, cultural and economic factors in the region that led to this development of this post-war modern architecture. I'm curious if there are other suburbs throughout the country or other places throughout the country that compare favorably using this architecture and those factors, and whether other suburbs have done sort of a better or worse job at preserving this kind of architecture. Sort of who's doing it well?
Yeah, well, there are some great examples of modern architecture in the county where folks are maybe a little ahead of us in raising awareness and having tours and open houses, and one is Palm Spring, and also in Los Angeles, they're doing a lot with modern architecture, and so there are some areas that have been studying their modern architecture a little longer than we have, and maybe have more developed outreach. This is the first effort in the D.C. area that I know of, and there's a lot more to learn about modern architecture in the D.C. area, so hoping that there'll be more work that comes out of this. Yes, in the back.
I live in East Bethesda, and we have very precious few homes that have used architects. It tends to be design build or design city build. Do you understand why folks aren't willing to pay for design and value these days?
That's a good question. I don't know why that is, other than possibly economics. But we have some really great architecture firms in the area, and it really shows with some of the wonderful work that they do. Yes.
This is not in Montgomery County, but in all of this, where does the ComSat building sit, both in your view of it as this genre and what its status is?
Yeah, ComSat is a great building, and it is in Montgomery County. It's in Clarksburg.
I was thinking of the building down.
Oh, and that's going to become a school?
Yes. The Intelsat, I'm sorry, I think.
Oh, Intelsat, that's right. Okay, yeah. The Intelsat building is I guess, scheduled to become a school. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar enough with the building to speak about it, but I have heard of it, and I think it's important to really consider the architectural value of a property. And the great thing about so many mid-century modern buildings is how adaptable they are, especially with schools and commercial buildings, that they have open floor plans that can be changed, interior walls can be moved, and Bell Labs building was adapted for new use and in New Jersey, and so we have a lot of now great examples of mid-century modern commercial buildings finding a new use, and so it's really a great opportunity in a lot of cases. Yes.
When these homes were built, there wasn't the focus on green architecture and green homes that we have right now. With all of this glass, were these homes more expensive to heat and air condition and to maintain, or was that not a factor?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, in some ways, there was a lot of concern and interest in what we now call as green design, in the sense that trees were retained on the properties, and a lot of these properties didn't have a lot in the way of lawn, so that was better for the environment not to have a lot of lawn. And but to speak to the issue of glass, it wasn't as energy efficient, and so that's something we've come to realize. And technology has progressed in the terms of energy efficiency in glass. So now we have much better insulation in glass than we had in the 1950s. So in a lot of cases, the historic glass can be removed and energy efficient glass can be put in, and it doesn't necessarily affect the way the building looks. And so that is a concern. In other cases, historic buildings had brise soleil or louvered panels that helped to shade what light came in. And it's interesting to me that that was being done in the mid-20th century, and now we see it being popular again. If you look at M&T banks that are being constructed, new buildings at Tenleytown Library has these brise soleils on it, and so it's a little bit back to the future. Yes?
I was just totally struck by your discussion of the house at East-West Highway and Connecticut Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
I go up and down that street all the time, and I
Yeah.
have no idea where that house is that you know.
Oh.
Right side.
It's right there at the intersection. Next time you go, take a look at it. One of the great things about it is that you don't notice it necessarily. It's so well tucked in, and the design is so well done that you don't say, "Wow, look at that modern building." And so,
To see the back, you have to walk around.
no, there's a courtyard off of Blackthorn Road. Is it off of Blackthorn Street? There's an alley, yeah, in there. It's in what was the Hamlet, section 5A, and there are little cul-de-sac alleys in the interior of those blocks.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Sure.
Opened my eyes.
Thanks. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.